Censorship is not new. The concept of withholding or changing information has existed in societies around the world since ancient times. The mainstream media focuses on censorship that exists across the globe, in foreign countries across the pond, such as Communist Party propaganda being churned out to control its citizens in China. Yet they fail to mention the censorship taking place within our own borders, in the US, in the UK.
Salvation for this sin is the gospel. The only way to really cure that what's on the inside is understanding that Jesus Christ died for our sins. And so to me, on a micro level, it's understanding.
Oh, and just like that, we lost him.
You can question news from foreign countries, question the sources, but you can't question your own. With recent revelations surrounding Biden's emails and the unrelenting crackdown on the spread of so-called misinformation and fake news, censorship is becoming a grave reality that is smothering freedom of speech. Welcome to the dark reality of censorship, where we will explore corruption, biases and the manipulation of information in depth. But first, if you'd like to support the channel, please subscribe to Dare to Fly Today and get ready to take flight. Turn on notifications so you get notified every time I upload a video. Like, share and leave a comment down below. You can also support the channel with a one-off donation on my Ko-fi page. All money goes towards the channel and helping to produce the content that I create. Now, let's fly into today's video. To be able to understand censorship, we need to know what it is. Censorship can be defined as the suppression or prohibition of any parts of books, films, news, anything that is considered obscene, politically unacceptable, or even a threat to security. Censorship occurs whenever some people succeed in imposing their political or moral values on others by suppressing words, images, or ideas that they find offensive. So it's one group of people imposing their morals and values on another, and this can be done through promoting content that they find acceptable, that's politically acceptable, whereas also censoring information, literature, anything that they disagree with. Why am I creating this video and this series? I'm creating this video and this series because I think it is an incredibly important topic that needs to be touched on. With what has happened recently in the news regarding the Hunter Biden emails and the laptop and the reaction from big tech and how they have censored the New York Post article, I think censorship is a very big issue right now. These social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, YouTube could be classed as one, but also search engines like Google that are actively censoring content that they disagree with or that they class as misinformation. It's dangerous because it's a threat to freedom of speech. And these platforms are used by millions and millions of people. The majority of the population, likely billions of people across the globe, accessing these platforms every single day. It seems to me that all of this censorship is gearing up just before the election, which isn't a coincidence. And it's interesting to see how big tech reacts to certain content that goes against one political party. You see a lot of censorship on anything bad coming out in regards to the Democrat Party, whereas any content that can arguably be seen as being against the Conservative Party is allowed to exist on the internet, that is allowed to exist and be shared on social media. We'll be getting into that a lot further in this series, but it's important to look at and examine, and I feel mainstream media are failing to hold big tech to account. And that's because they're part of the system, they're part of this big machine. To understand censorship, we need to delve into it further, and that means taking a look at the history of censorship and where it all came from, where it all started. It is believed the origins of censorship go as far back as ancient Rome, in 453 BC. The term censor can be traced back to the office of censor, which was established in Rome. The ideal of good governance included shaping the minds of those in society, shaping the character so that they were impressionable, ensuring that everyone in society is of good character, which involved shaping their minds. Censorship was seen as an honourable task. Moving on, Socrates argued for the censorship of poets and writers and authors in his city. He believed that young people were impressionable and that shaping their minds at such a young age will build them into greater characters and benefit society. He said, "The beginning of any process is most important, especially for anything young and tender. Therefore, it was important that young people were told stories that would be of benefit to society." However, in 399 BC, Socrates was sentenced to drink poison for his corruption of youth and acknowledgement of unorthodox divinities. Further along the timeline, it is believed that in 300 BC, censorship was first introduced in China, as the first law on censorship was introduced around this time. In 325 AD, the first ever mention of free speech is introduced. The free expression of thought challenged pre-Christian rulers. It was troublesome for Christians as well, as orthodoxy was becoming further established. The Christian doctrine church introduced the Nicene Creed. This was because as more books were being written, copied and shared, ideas perceived as subversive and heretical spread beyond control of authority. As a result, censorship became more tough, and the punishments were more severe and much harsher. If we head further forward into more modern times in the 1700s, censorship was being introduced in newspapers. The press in Europe especially was subject to strict censorship. Then in the 1800s, public concern for offensive literature continued. Libraries were seen as guardians of literature, and that they should be promoting books suitable for younger readers. This gave teachers and librarians the ability to censor a wide range of books under the pretext of protecting readers from morally destructive and offensive writing. Of course, this was all subjective, as it was the librarians and the teachers deeming what was offensive and what was morally destructive to younger readers. From 1855 to 1917, censorship in the USSR was changing, it was adapting. The Russian Empire had a long tradition of strict censorship. The Russian Empire was very slow to adopt changes that were being made across Europe to censorship. There were reforms being made which were loosening the grip on censorship and making it more fair in some ways. However, in Russia, censorship reforms started in a single decade. From 1855 to 1865, during the reign of Tsar Alexander II, there was a transition from legislation on pre-censorship, which is determining in advance what is and isn't acceptable, to a punitive system based on legal responsibility. The press had more freedom during the decade, as more radical ideas and voices were being able to be heard. They were speaking out and producing content that wouldn't have otherwise been able to have been produced. However, in 1866, censorship laws were reimposed, which eliminated any and all reform. Then in 1917, all censorship was abolished in decrees which were issued by the temporary government. A very famous example of censorship started in the 1930s with the Nazi book burning. Books that were deemed illegal were burned by Nazi youths on behalf of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. This was done to cleanse the minds of society, as it was believed that any books that were produced by Jewish authors, humanitarians, and communists would infect the minds of those in society. Therefore, any books written by those groups were burned. In 1950, during apartheid in South Africa, there was a large amount of censorship occurring. Not only censorship, but torture and murder. The aim was to destroy the South African Extra-Parliamentary Liberation Movement and the African National Congress, and also to erase public memory and shape their minds. There were prohibitive policies on the press and media and what content and literature was allowed to exist that resembled and echoed a lot of what existed in the USSR. Moving to the 90s, from 1993 to 1995, the armed Islamic group declared war on the media and press in Algeria. A famous quote that said, "Those that live by the pen shall die by the sword." And from May 1993 to 1995, journalists, editors and media workers were executed. 9 were killed in 1993, 19 were killed in 1994, and 24 were murdered in 1995. The aim was punishing journalists and scaring them from acting as mouthpieces for the Algerian authorities. The murders were triggered by conflict, as it was believed that the Algerian army disrupted the election of National Assembly in 1992 to prevent the fundamentalist party called the Islamic Salvation Front from being elected. And as a result, the Algerian press were caught in the crossfire. And then today, censorship has changed, it has adapted. It's a lot different in some ways to what it was hundreds of years ago. Censorship seems more prevalent in society than ever. It's developed and adapted along with technology and how society has changed too. The rise of big tech, such as Google, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, all these platforms that everyone uses every day, have such a tight grasp on society. And it seems that they are allowed to deem what is and isn't acceptable, what news you can and can't read. Because they allow information to exist on their platforms, they are now deeming what is okay. They are going against freedom of speech, all because they can, all because they won't be held responsible for anything. This means that the term fake news is being thrown around along with misinformation to disrupt narratives. It's used to shut up individuals who are sharing their own truths. The mainstream media like to throw it around too. They say there's a big crackdown on fake news along with big tech, but it's them who decide what is fake news. Nowadays, the quote, "the pen is mightier than the sword," has never been more true. Words have such an impact. They have such weight. Words can destroy a person. Journalists have more power now than ever before. Censorship has become part of their power, part of their toolkit, and all of this is wrapped up in bias. This bias is often a left-wing, anti-conservative bias, and we've seen that recently. We've seen that with the purge of many accounts on YouTube, Twitter and Facebook, and it's often the purge of accounts which are conservative. It's all for the destruction of core values, morals, this idea of tradition, patriotism, all of these values that many people hold that are seen as conservative values are being torn apart and destroyed through media, and anything that is seen as a conservative value, a traditional value, good morals, is censored. You won't see it in the mainstream media. You won't see it come up straight away when you have a Google online. It's monitored by Facebook and Twitter and big tech.
Facebook recently censored this ad, although each fact in it can be proven.
Biden and Harris support abortion up to the moment of birth, all at taxpayer expense, and they promise to nominate only pro-abortion judges.
This is an incredibly important time where we need to be reaching voters in swing states, and so we were frustrated to see the abortion lobby get an assist from big tech.
Quigley says it's one of numerous examples.
They have done their absolute hardest to silence pro-life voices.
And now it's extended to the presidential campaign, according to Brent Bazell of the Media Research Center.
We've analyzed and we've documented how 260 different users on Facebook and Twitter have had their posts about Biden scrubbed from social media.
Now Facebook and Twitter have censored a major newspaper's stories of possible corruption involving Ukraine, Hunter Biden, and maybe his father Joe.
This marks the first time big tech has ever directly tried to censor major media companies. The New York Post has the fourth highest circulation of any newspaper in America.
The Senate Judiciary Committee wants Twitter's Jack Dorsey and Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg to appear soon to answer questions for their actions.
They can silence anyone and everyone who dares report on any facts, any news, inconsistent with the desires of the big tech billionaires.
Chris Lewis of the Public Knowledge Group thinks conservatives are overreacting.
Most studies that I've seen, they don't point to any sort of conservative bias.
But LifeNews.com says it's certainly been abused by pro-choice, so-called fact-checkers employed by the media platforms.
Our pro-life news stories are slapped with this big warning saying that it's false and misleading, which of course is in and of itself false and misleading.
A major sticking point being how much big tech platforms dominate American communication.
Social media is a battlefield where pro-life people need to be engaged.
This poses the single greatest threat to free speech in America today.
The Twitter and Facebook heads will have a chance to come voluntarily before the committee before they're subpoenaed to appear. Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
The censorship of these messages, these core values, these traditions that are being shared and that many people hold, is allowing the opposite to thrive. Immorality, conformity, sameness, corruption, These are the new values that are to be accepted in society and are being promoted by mainstream media, being promoted and allowed to exist and multiply on big tech platforms. The division that is being sown into society is prevalent. For example, the censorship of the New York Post article regarding Hunter Biden is incriminating, yet big tech don't want you to read it. Facebook doesn't really want you to look at that. Twitter has fact-checked it because it's incriminating and it goes against their biases. It hurts their investment into the parties they are backing. This is just the beginning of my in-depth exploration of censorship. This issue is huge. Researching this, I've found things that are very eye-opening that I'm going to share with you and that needs to be discussed. I wouldn't really be surprised if this series was to get censored by YouTube, which would be very, very ironic. In the next part, we will be exploring the Hunter Biden emails, the recent revelations that have come out, and how this has been handled by big tech, how it's been censored and is threatening freedom of speech, freedom of press. We're going to be delving deep into corruption and exposing some biases that do exist. If you'd like to support the channel, please subscribe to Dare to Fly today and get ready to take flight. Turn on notifications so you get notified every time I upload a video. Like, share and leave me a comment down below on your thoughts on censorship or your thoughts on what has happened recently in the news. You can support my channel with a one-off donation on Ko-fi, which will help fund this channel and help me produce the content I want to create. I did mention the risk of being censored on YouTube and I'd like to address that. I'm slowly moving my content over to brand YouTube as a backup, so I will put links down below so you can subscribe there. Content is still being uploaded, it's a slow process of adapting to that, but you can also watch the content there. There's no censorship there, so the risk of being taken down and being throttled by YouTube is hopefully non-existent. Thank you for watching this first video of the dark reality of censorship. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. And as always, fly high, fear less.